Welcome to the Field Ecology and Botanical Identification Training course. As John pointed out, and Ciara, this is I just ran it through PowerPoint. Yeah. So, as Ciara and John pointed out, this is a pilot program. So we are developing this over the weeks as we go along. So if there's particular issues you have in terms of understanding or how the clarity of the presentations, the tools we're using online, some are easier or are not as easy as other ones. It's important that you give feedback to us as quickly as possible, particularly if you're having difficulties, but we also welcome the positive feedback that allows us to adapt it as we go through. In particular, we want to have a very good program on this by the time we get to the end of the 8 weeks, that you're all happy that you've achieved the learning outcomes, but also that if there are other cohorts coming after you, that we have a very good program ready to go off the shelf that can just be rolled out to the rest of your colleagues as well. So this course you'll develop a deeper understanding of the ecology of Irish farmland ecosystems in general, and you'll also develop an in-depth knowledge of the role and function of results-based ecological condition scoring within the Irish agri-environment measures. Before we start, I want to set the course in a slightly wider context and look at the diversity of Irish landscape and some of the issues and sustainability challenges that we face. So you'll all know from your roles going around the country that we live in a diverse countryside. Okay, we have a broad landscape. This is some work we've done classifying the landscape types of the country over the last number of years. You see we have a range of landscapes, from the intensified lowland areas that have a wide range of land uses in the green colours, all the way through to the extensive mountainous areas and peatlands in the browns and the greys here. All these different land types and everything in between are characterised by differences in their geology, soils, topography, wide range of climate variations as we move from the mountains in Connemara, where we've over 3 metres of rainfall, to the southeast, where we have around 800 millimetres of rainfall. And these all have a wide range of land use capacities. So fundamentally, when we're designing our land use policy, we must have this understanding that all land cannot be all things to all people, and that one size does not fit all. Also, just a word of context, you might see we've mentioned the word sustainability quite a bit during this 8-week course, and just a word of context on what we mean by in terms of sustainable agriculture and land use in general. So this is one of the best diagrams I've seen to actually present what sustainable development is. This is a diagram representing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations to 2030. But it's divided into what is depicted here as a layer cake, okay? So here the economy is a tool of a functioning society, and the society has to operate within the limits of the baseline foundation of the biosphere. So we have to work within the environment, the capacity of the natural environment, and in terms of the atmosphere, the hydrosphere in terms of water, and the terrestrial environment or land environment that we're working on and living in as well. But the scale of the challenges we face in terms of working towards sustainable land use cannot be underestimated. So globally, we've made significant strides in the last number of decades, the last 100 years or so, in terms of the amount of people that the planet can support. But this has had significant social and environmental costs, which are ultimately self-destructive, which we see at the moment. The government, in response to this, has declared a biodiversity and climate emergency in May 2019. And these major challenges we have in terms of habitat loss, these are global ones, climate change, pollution, invasive species, driven by our production and consumption patterns, particularly in the development world, are leading to this depletion of our environmental base on which society is sustained. Okay, so this leads to the depletion of biodiversity, impacts on the range of services that are produced from our land and water resources, and contributes to climate change in general. So this impacts basically the conditions under which we will live in over our lifetime, but also the condition of the environment that we hand on, and it impacts hugely on future generations in particular. Bringing it back to Ireland, but this is a slide we had at the Citizens Assembly on biodiversity loss, and some of these findings, when they're presented to the general public as well, are quite stark, you know, and to a certain extent, some of them can be frightening. But often the loss of biodiversity, particularly in Ireland, it's stark, but it's often manifested as a gradual or localised decline of many habitats and species, to adds up to this collective what we see in the national monitoring data from the EPA and the National Parks and Wildlife Service. So under the monitoring for the Natura 2000, 85% of the habitats that are monitored, the protected habitats, are in unfavourable conditions. So they're not meeting their conditions in terms of what is expressed in the Birds and Habitats Directive, for example. And what's worse, they're not even stabilised. The ones that are in bad condition and the ones that are in moderate conditions, it's continual decline of about 46% of the habitats that are monitored. The bird species data that's monitored, so birds are used as an indicator of the overall health of the landscape in general, that people like Ian will talk to you about during this course as well. But overwintering water birds have declined by a massive 40%. That's approximately 500,000 individuals that are no longer coming to Ireland that were coming in the 1990s. In terms of our breeding or resident birds, there's 20% in long-term decline, 30% are stable or increasing. These are ones that are generous habitat preferences in general. A surprising figure is, considering we've had a lot of concentration in our agri-environmental schemes on grasslands, and we are an island that prides ourselves on our grasslands. In terms of our semi-natural grasslands, 30% of the area monitored has just been lost in the last 10 to 15 years. And lost, we mean abandoned, identified, converted into other land uses, either buildings, roads gone over them, or afforestation as well. So when we look at these national figures, we see major issues, continuous decline. So it leads us to see that we've got a problem with our existing interactions with the environment. But we do have a diverse land base, and this land base that we manage provides us with a range of ecosystem services that you see there. So this provides everything that we need in terms of food, raw materials, medicines, fresh water, but also production support services such as pollination, soil quality, nutrient recycling, and also there's hugely important for human well-being. Recreation and tourism is all dependent on this. One of the major issues we have, though, is that in terms of the supply of these services, only certain ones, particularly the provisioning services of food, fibre, medicines, to a certain extent water, is monetised in our market system. Okay, so a lot of what we're dependent on are non-market ecosystem services, or what is termed in economic terms public goods, that are not paid for through the market or recognised through the market. And as a result, we have an undersupply of all these supporting, regulating and cultural services that we also depend on for human well-being. So there is an imbalance there. So this is where our public policy comes in. So we have a highly regulated land use system and food system in general. It's not open to the vagaries of the free market, as we know, through the common agricultural policy. And within this as well, we have our agri-environmental schemes that are designed in a way since the 1990s as a mechanism for payment for these other ecosystem services that aren't necessarily provided for within the market. We are seeing over the last number of years this testing and trialling of what we term results-based payment systems. And these are simply payment systems where the payments to the farmer for their land management is linked to the quality of the target. So we generally use in the Irish system a 10-point scoring system, and as the condition of the target, be it a field or a particular feature within a field or a field boundary, as its score goes from low scores from 0 to 4, or from 4 to 7, or from 7 to 10, the payment levels increase. Okay. So the payments are made based on the delivery of the result, whereas in action-based payments before, you were paying on prescriptions or actions that were assumed to deliver the result, okay? And often, given the diversity of the land base, you can't assume that the same action will be successful in every part. And this is where the action-based has maybe run into problems. We either have a very complicated, long list of actions bespokely designed for different landscape, different farming systems, becomes very bureaucratic in the action-based approach, or we have a simplified approach where we have very simple actions and assume they work to give us to a certain broad base, but that will never give us the highest quality. Now, in the Irish system as well, just some history or context, this has been developed in Ireland, starting with the Burn Life programme, with the initial framework and principles around this back in 2004. Initial testbeds of the results-based payment systems in Europe were in Austria, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom in the North Pennines back from the late 80s, when we were first discussing the need for agri-environmental schemes in our common agricultural policy. These were being discussed then. But they fell into disfavour over a while, and a lot of them were wondering, how are we going to actually scientifically ensure that the results indicators, the features we measure within the farm, are actually going to be simplified enough that they can be used and adapted within advisory systems, within the paying agencies, and by farmers themselves. So a lot of work has gone on over the last number of years. In the Burn programme in particular, the initial testbed of the Life programme was scaled up to 160 farms in the Burn programme in the 2010 to 2015 period. Some of us that were working on this approach at the time hoped that in 2013 we produced a number of reports hoping that this would be rolled out on a wider basis at that stage, particularly to upland commonage areas, for example. But the decision was made, and in hindsight it was probably the right one, that we didn't have the capacity or the knowledge base at the time to actually transfer what was happening in the Burn context in relatively small areas in other parts of Europe and scale that up to the whole country without huge risks. So at the time, the decision was made in the last RDP to have a larger number of pilots testing the approach in a diverse range of situations. Also, Europe and the European Union, the European Commission, DG Environment in particular, invested in these results-based agri-environmental pilot programmes across the EU. So we were involved in pilot programmes that Dolores worked on as well in 2014 to 2018 in pilots testing the framework in Ireland, Spain. We had sister projects in the UK and Romania as well. All while this was going on within various EU Life programmes, Interreg programs that were a range of researchers around the country and department and different NGOs were involved in testing the approach in these multi-actor European Innovation Partnership pilot programs as well. Then the success of this was seen that it was working, but the department themselves wanted to test this, and you've tested it through the REAP programme in terms of the administrative side of it and the capacity building through the REAP programme. And to the extent now that we're now at the ACRES programme and extending out this hybrid model, so combining results-based and action where appropriate. So we haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We have basically tried to mesh the best of both approaches in terms of action and results-based together in this new model of hybrid, results-based and with supporting actions and locally adapted to 8 cooperation project areas across the country as well. So a lot of what goes into the scoring systems is based on a lot of research over the last years, taking into account not just the research on agri-environmental schemes, but the research on our understanding of species interactions, particularly priority species and rare and endangered species, with the habitat conditions, foraging requirements, nesting requirements that they have, combining this with remote sensing, habitat mapping of the extent of these various different areas. And we have come up with these relatively simple scoring systems that are essentially incentivizing and rewarding the provision of multiple ecosystem services across the nature, water and soil or climate interface. So we'll see as we go through these scorecards and try to understand them in a bit more in depth. There's different sections within the scorecard that are based around ecological integrity and takes into account our basic understanding of the quality of ecosystems, how they're structured, how they function, and how that determines the ultimate services we get from them. There's work incorporated in relatively simple terms at the moment in terms of soil integrity. And we know that the more bare soil we have, the more erosion. We're losing carbon from these situations if it's in poor condition, and generally speaking, the carbon is locked in if they're in good condition. And then we have issues around hydrological integrity, and these scores, whether their systems are in some of the scorecards, near natural hydrological systems are highly modified systems. So these are incorporated in. Also with the damaging activities, these are incorporated mainly as a communication tool. You would assume 95, 99% of the time, the good communications, none of these activities will be taking place on farms. But they're there on the scorecards to ensure that when the farmers and the advisor are going through this, if I pick up on any of these, I'll make sure that is addressed immediately and is solved. So there's things like inappropriate burning, feed site damage, dumping, evidence of inappropriate herbicide use was used in the past in these. And these have very, very heavy negative weighting within the scorecards. So generally, even with not having any of this, you just have a 0. But any of these are picked up, your -20s, -30s. So marks that you would have got in the previous ones are lost in this. So there's a real sort of message there around these ones, that these ones shouldn't be taking place. And generally they don't. So you would hope that many of these won't be taking place at all. So that's the background context of everything, where we've come to, where we want to go to. Specifically in relation to this course, what you're going to learn, okay? So at the end of this course, you will be able to demonstrate an understanding of the basics of ecology. We recognise that some of you might have an understanding of a lot of this already through your primary degrees and other programs, and also what you've learned over your careers. But this will solidify it into a common framework, okay, and develop your understanding of and you will, as with Dolores as well, develop a proficiency in plant identification, particularly of the indicator species that indicate the condition of a range of habitats. You'll collect and interpret field and biological data, and you'll demonstrate an understanding of the application of the field scorecards to results-based payment schemes in general. We'll also touch on a bit in terms of context, a background understanding of the legislation and policy, and overall you will have a wide range of experiences over the next number of weeks in terms of evaluating habitats, species, vegetation communities, essential components of these scoring systems. So essentially, the same way as the moment any year involved in livestock farming, you're able to walk into a field and you can assess the animals and you know what condition score they're in, you know, or you're able to score, well, we know roughly on the Europe system, based on indicators on the fleshing, the conformation of the animals, the results indicators, essentially, what that animal is worth within the market. The same thing with this, you should be able to walk into a field, and even before you do the scoring system, I know if that's a poor, medium or good condition field in the context of these result indicators for environmental services. One thing I wanted to say from the very start of this, just because we say a field is good for some service and is basically not providing these services, doesn't mean it's a bad field. Some of the best arable cropland fields and improved agricultural grasslands in the country will be very high in terms of their food production services. They might have minimal impact or no impact at all if possible on the other ecosystem services, but they won't be providing lots of them, so they won't be getting high payments. Whereas other features within the farm might be producing lower volumes of food, but they're very essential in terms of pollination, which are supporting services, reducing risk of sediment and nutrient loss to water, providing high value in terms of carbon storage in particular, and high value in terms of biodiversity and space for nature. So I think that's a very important communication tool around this. We're scoring them for their nature, water and climate value within the scoring systems. And just because a field scores high doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad field. That might be a hugely important field for food and fibre production. Does everyone get that? So that's a concept. I think we need to be very careful when we're communicating this at the start of the programme, both to advisors and farmers. In this context, you know, in food production, we've good land and bad land. In this context, there's no bad land in the country whatsoever. Every single inch of the country, water resources, land resources, is good for something. And we have to acknowledge what it's good for and basically ramp up the natural capacity to optimize that services to actually get to where we are in terms of sustainable land use. Does everyone get that? So I know we've all grown up on farms. We all know we'd prefer one type of field over another. But this is sort of changing the mindset a bit, that we have to get this out of our head. There's no such thing as a bad field, okay? A bad piece of land. Everything is good for something that is optimized in the correct way. So in terms of the learning pathways, we're going to go through, each week is divided into a module. This week is your introduction. The week 2 will concentrate a lot on the background of the ecology of Irish habitats, an overview of this. Week 3 will deal a bit with the nature conservation legislation and policy. Then we'll go into the more detail on the agri-environmental scheme design, the different tools that can be used, the details of the scoring system itself. And then once we've got a handle on that, we'll go into detail in terms of how you change a field, if it's in poor condition or medium condition, or if in high condition, how do you maintain that, or what are the management requirements that are required to actually, so you'll understand basically what the scoring systems are telling us and what management signals it should be giving us as well. Then once we get on to week 7, we'll be really preparing you for the field course. We'll be going through health and safety survey techniques as a background, so we're prepared when we get into the 2-day intensive course at the end in week 8. And there we'll be applying everything we've learned in the previous number of weeks in a field context, so you're ready to go with the scoring system. And by the time we're finished on the evening of day 2, you'll be walking away confident of your understanding of the Irish environment, the ecology of Irish habitats, and the application of the scoring systems in particular. So that's what we're hoping as teachers and lecturers, and working together with you, we all get to by week 8. So the course process, it's a blended learning approach, so it's combining in-person activities this week 1 in this introductory program and the 2-day field course with an online delivery program as well. That will be delivered in our CPD online system that we'll introduce you over the course of this day. And all activities relating to the e-learning part, the online part of the course, will take place within the web platform. And participants, you'll be able to communicate with other participants on the course through various forums, and that ask each other questions if you're unsure what's required in activity. And also you'll be able to click on a help button, and that will go through to our emails, so we'll be able to see that and respond to questions within the forums as well. Sean will go through this later on. So the course takes place over 2 weeks. It's non-accredited at the moment, but depending on how the pilot goes and how much of an interest is, we would hope maybe that in the future this might be accredited. It's designed to be equivalent to 5 credits at the National Framework for Qualification at level 9. So you all have a level 8 undergraduate degree or a master's program at the moment, but it's designed at level 9, assuming that everyone here at the moment is a scientist, okay? So in terms of the course assessment, your performance will be assessed based on a final portfolio. And that final portfolio will be all the activities you've done throughout the course would be collated in a template. We'll put up the template next week for you. Okay, you'll see the template. You basically copy and paste the activities you've done into that portfolio, and that'll be submitted at the end of the course. We'll also have a number of online quizzes. We'll go through some of these today. You'll be completing this after you've done some reading material, and these will also form part of the assessment as well. And there'll be a portfolio, planned portfolio, an e-portfolio that you will be completing over the 8 weeks as well. That's a digital species planned portfolio that Dolores will go through later on. In terms of recognition of your achievement, we will use what are termed digital badges and a certificate of completion. Digital badges in particular, these are a method of recognising learner skills or achievements as you progress through these online programs. They can be displayed on online platforms and online CVs, so you get a badge that can be displayed with metadata behind it, saying what the work you've done to achieve that badge is on LinkedIn profiles, for example. We'll award badges at key milestones within the program. So there'll be, when you've gone through the halfway point of the online material, you get the first badge. The second badge will be achieved on completion of the field workshop. And the final badge basically validates your completion of the entire course, the submission of your online portfolio, and we'll award that as we assess the online portfolio. As they meet a minimum standard, you're awarded that badge together with your certificate of completion. The learner workload, we've tried to estimate this for you because we know you're all working as well full-time, but the point is here, this is a pilot program. This is our estimation at the moment of the current workload and what we're aiming for. So over the 8 weeks, we're estimating that you'll approximately 5 hours per week. Some weeks might be slightly heavier than others, but it'll work out around the 5 weeks. This 5 hours, this will be your time spent viewing the online material, completing the activities, your additional reading and any searching additional information if needed, and working with feedback and course related communications. And then we have our input. This includes also divided up over the 8 weeks, this day and the 2 days at the end. So we hope you enjoy the course. Is there any general questions at the moment on this general outline? It'll become clear as we go through the day. But what I might introduce before we have a coffee break, I'll maybe introduce it to Dolores to go through the ecological concepts and principles.